Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 115. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank everyone who has shared the show, has left us comments, reviews, who has liked it, and then given us feedback. All that support allows us to continue to bring on expert guests and highlight more individuals in the strength game, just like our guests today. I also want to thank our sponsors. Samson Equipment provides first-class weight rooms and has earned an exceptional reputation of providing the finest quality, design, and customer service. Being a direct manufacturer, the team at Samson brings full customization capabilities and not only branding, but in custom equipment needed to execute your next project. From racks, plates, barbells, benches, flooring, storage, dumbbells, and much more, Samson equipment is durable and made to order from premium grade materials, all built from scratch, start to finish. Samson Equipment provides professional weight room solutions for all your strength and conditioning needs. See the Samson standard for yourself and learn more at samsonequipment.com. Also want to thank our sponsor, Cerberus Strength. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus is trusted by the top strength sport athletes and lifters in the world. Cerberus's wide range of products are made by athletes for athletes, truly living up to its moniker, made by the strong for the strong. If you're in the market for the highest quality strength and conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to use promo code strength_game at checkout to receive 10% off your next order at cerberusstrength.com. Also want to thank Sport Kilt. Sport Kilt offers a wide range of universal and clan tartans, as well as custom sport kilts and an excellent selection of accessories and apparel to complement the kilt wear. For over 25 years, Sport Kilt has been striving to perfect their version of the Scottish Classic to create the ultimate garment of fashion and function. Check out the full line of kilts and join the kilt life at sportkilt.com and be sure to use code TSG to save on your next order. And in this week's episode, I am joined by Matt Clark. Matt is the Director of Strength and Conditioning for track and field and cross country at the University of Arkansas. Clark joined the Razorbacks as a strength and conditioning coach in 2014 before being promoted to director in 2023. During his tenure, the Razorbacks men's and women's teams have won 8 NCAA team championships, including both the men's and women's teams titles at the 2023 NCAA Indoor Championships. He began his coaching career as a volunteer track coach with the Arkansas track team in Fayetteville, Arkansas in 2011. And prior to joining the University of Arkansas strength and conditioning staff in 2014, he also worked as a personal trainer and nutrition coach. He also continues to train a group of professional track athletes who make their home base at the University of Arkansas. The athletes he has trained have combined won 2 Olympic medals and 20 World Championships medals. Clark himself is a well-decorated athlete competing in the decathlon at the University of Northern Iowa from 2005 to 2009. He earned All-American honors 3 times and was a 2-time first-team academic All-American as an athlete competing for UNI, in addition to qualifying for the 2008 Olympic trials and the 2009, 2010, 2017, and 2022 U.S. Championships. Clark continues to train and compete, having competed at the U.S. Championships in the decathlon in 2022 at age 34. In addition to his track and field background, Clark has competed in men's physique, CrossFit, and triathlons. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Matt Clark. What's going on, everybody? Today I've got the at the moment super busy, and I'm thankful to have him on today. Coach Matt Clark. How you doing today, Coach?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. We kind of finally got to get going today. I know that you've got a ton of athletes right now as we're recording this, about to send a bunch of Olympic hopefuls off to trials right before the Olympics kind of kick off, and so you're in high demand and you're pretty busy. So I appreciate you taking some time today to share with our audience.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Sorry, it's been a little bit of chaos management making this happen, but I appreciate you having me on.
No, I appreciate you coming on. I'm glad we were able to carve out a little bit of time between all the things you got going on. I mean, you got to get the athletes ready. The Olympics are knocking on the door right now. So, hey, let's hop into it and get a little bit more to know about the backstory of you. How'd you kind of get started in sports, lifting, and competing in a lot of track yourself? Because I mean, that's the athletes that you work with. But how did you really get start in your own track and field career into like what you're kind of doing today to still compete and stay active?
Sure, yeah. I guess I'll take you back about 30 years. My parents owned a just a commercial gym when I was growing up. They opened it before I was born, so I kind of grew up in a gym. My mom was teaching aerobics classes, and my dad was owner and operator, and so I just after school, sometimes before school, I was just kind of hanging out in the gym, and so that culture is just kind of how I was raised. And then uh, uh, later, my dad ended up selling the business, but we converted our garage into a weight room. So, and a pretty nice one. He brought a lot of the equipment home from the fitness center, and we kind of set up a little uh, training zone in our garage. So when I was in middle school and high school, I just walk out of my living room into a weight room to get to my car. So I didn't. I just kind of started doing stuff on my own in there when I was in maybe sixth or seventh grade, and then as I got a little bit older, my dad started teaching me some stuff in there. And so I got exposed to strength training pretty early. And I was always doing sports. I started running track when I was 10. I started off as a 400 runner, and then I kind of moved up to the 800 meters. And my high school was a big track high school. Track's really, we have a good history with a lot of state championships. And so kind of became an 800-meter runner. And then by the time the track season was done, I was kind of sick of running 800s, but I liked track. And so I started just experimenting with uh, pentathlons and decathlons over the summer, just as a break between the track season and the cross country season. And so I ended up getting recruited for that. I I competed at like the AAU national championships and the USATF, just the youth national championships a few times, and got the attention of some college coaches and ended up going to UNI to compete in the decathlon. So that's kind of my background with uh, strength and then how I got into track. But really, as far as the profession of strength and conditioning as a coach, uh, I kind of just was in the right place at the right time, honestly. That it's a very uh, uncommon route that I took. I when I was in college, I kind of figured out that what goes on in the summer with coaches. There's always recruiting. You're trying to refill the coffers and you stay busy over the summer. But then there's also, if you really want to move up pretty high in the field, you have to be willing to move around the country and potentially move your family. And really, honestly, when I was like 19 years old, I kind of figured that out and thought that's not really something I want to do. And so I didn't really want to get into coaching, and I just focused on competing. And when I was done with college, my senior year was 2009. I stayed in Iowa for another year, and kept training because I was qualified for the 2010 U.S. Championships. And then at that point, all the coaches that I had at Northern Iowa had come down here to Arkansas. And so my girlfriend at the time, my wife now, was moving to Florida to do student teaching to get her teaching degree. And I was kind of in no man's land trying to figure out what to do. I didn't really like training for the decathlon in Iowa, where, you know, it's freezing for a significant portion of the year, and we don't have, there's decent facilities, but running workouts in January in the basketball arena on on cement wasn't ideal. So it was 2010, and I figured if I was gonna train any longer and I really wanted to go through the 2012 Olympic trials, I would move somewhere uh, where the facilities were better, the weather was better, and just to try to reunite with my old coaches, particularly my decathlon coach, Travis Geffert. And so, uh, 2011, I moved here just to throw a Hail Mary through the 2012 Olympic trials, and I planned on moving back to Iowa afterwards. And then just liked it here. I started personal training here, and I was running a workout at the track one day in 2014, right before we hosted the regional meet, and I was just approached by the coaches, and they said, "Hey, we need a new strength coach. Are you interested?" And I didn't have my CSCS. I had never run a collegiate weight room before. I came through a collegiate weight room as an athlete, so I kind of had an idea of what it would look like, but I was a personal trainer that just kind of kept on training myself in the area. And so that was one of those situations where it was in my head, it was, here's a really good opportunity. Even though you might not know how to do it, take the opportunity and figure out how to do it, instead of turning it down because, it's intimidating, or maybe there's some imposter syndrome. But I thought that I could figure it out and learn along the way. So I took advantage of the opportunity, and now I just finished my 10th year doing that. So that's kind of the longer explanation, but that's how I ended up here. Was just pursuing the decathlon, and it honestly just kind of uh, fell into my lap. But I think the reason I've stayed here is uh, because we've had a lot of success, and I fortunately haven't had to go through that traditional route where I have to move my family. And I have 3 kids now, so I haven't had to move my family around the country in order to try to move up to the next level. I've been able to just kind of make it work here. So, yeah, 10 years as a strength and conditioning coach, and I've only worked for one team, one university, men's and women's track and field and cross country, and I haven't trained anybody else.
Yeah, that is a very different story than most people, and I'll tell you that's way different than my story because I'm on school number 8, and it's not, I wouldn't say my way is the way to go. Um, I think it's got some good experiences, but I definitely would like to put some roots down in a place and stay more than a year or two. Like even if you're not trying to move on, you're trying to find that right place too. So I think when you guys have had the success that you have too, you said what now since we kind of put together everything leading into this episode, you guys won your 8th championships with Arkansas. So congrats on that.
I
Um,
appreciate it. Thank you.
and like that, you don't really need to move up when you're having as much success as that. And you can kind of keep in place, especially when you got a family now as well.
Yeah, and that's it's been obviously unexpected convenience. Was the only school I've worked with is the most successful track school in history. And so obviously they've won more championships than I've been involved with, but I've been fortunate to be involved with 8 of them now, and then a handful of runner-ups and third places, and yeah, there's, whenever I think every coach at some point looks at, what's the landscape with other opportunities around the country, and it usually just comes back to, I'm already kind of where at the highest level of success for the sport that I train. So it would really involve maybe branching outside the sport and trying to work with other sports. And yeah, right now it's just a happenstance that I happened to start out where I am.
No, what I think you said it yourself best too. Like that imposter syndrome sometimes can freeze people,
Hmm.
and like getting into the position where you're the right place, right time, like maybe not the right credentials, but you had the experience. You just kind of had to go out and get that stuff. And you said yes, and you kind of figured it out along the way, which I mean, set you up for the opportunity you have. Like when you kind of look at track is a very different landscape. And I know myself, I've never worked at a school that's probably had a fully funded, like full track and field team, both men's and women's. Like it's usually just kind
Hmm.
of sporadic. And I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like it feels like as a strength coach and you work with one of those big schools, you're basically working what other people would feel like a Power Five like football program where there's so many athletes, so many different kind of personalities, so many different like specialities and types. You yourself being like a decathlete from college and then after like post collegiately as well, it seems like almost like the perfect type of athlete you want for a track and field like strength coach. Like, because it you know a little bit of the landscape of all the events, and you're kind of a generalist at all of them. But then like you need to be specialist in some ways. Like, how do you feel like your collegiate career and like your athleticism has kind of set you up to be like a good strength coach for a track and field like program such as Arkansas?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's a couple different uh, approaches to it. You know, as I think the biggest thing with me was when I started my first year, I had some pretty elite guys on the team. So just, you know, when I started, it was only the men, and I had Jerry Lawson, Omar McLeod, and Clive Pullen. Those three were all in the 2016 Olympics, 2 years later after I started. Um, but I think the biggest thing was just maybe having been in that environment and having been a part of a track team before. Creating the programs was a little bit intimidating to me, but developing the relationships came pretty easy with a lot of those guys. And so I think that's a mistake that a lot of strength coaches make is they focus maybe a little bit too much on making the perfect program and not enough on creating the right relationships. And so I've looked back at some of the programming that I did then, and it leaves a lot to be wanted. But I, I right from the beginning, the relationship component, it was exciting to be in that environment because I had a bunch of guys who were really good at the sport who also wanted to be there and brought really positive attitudes. And it was just kind of infectious. It raised the ceiling for everybody else. And so um, I do think that my experience as a decathlete and then also just my upbringing, I was just always in a weight room. I developed competence pretty early on navigating a weight room, even if I wasn't particularly strong until a lot later. But there's some small things with just having been in that environment with some athletes are really intimidated by it. They don't want to push hard. Some people, they've been pushed really hard and they want to load up the weight, but they have no idea what proper mechanics look like or feel like. And so I do think my background just helped me kind of navigate those areas with helping athletes to develop the confidence that they can push it in here without getting hurt. And you do have the requisite skill set. We just have to be more aggressive. And then other people who are really aggressive, but maybe we keep uh, getting bitten by the same injury bug. So how can we use the weight room as a tool to develop some more resilience? I think all that stuff is stuff that my background helped me with, as far as just program creation, and maybe a motivational uh, component. But I think the biggest part with it was just developing the relationships from the beginning with those that really good crew of athletes that I happened to that just fell in my lap my first year, and then we were off to the races after that. Um, but I think you touched on something that's a really good point. For me, the mindset that I've always had is trying to find the right place, the right situation, and so I think a lot of people end up chasing jobs, trying to improve the situation if they can't improve where they are. So if I'm not articulating that very well, but I it's kind of this the grass is always greener on the other side approach, and so they end up hopping around a lot. And to me, it just if I couldn't make it work where I was, I just really wasn't that interested in hopping around the world or hopping around the US to try to find a better place. So I just tried really hard to uh, create the environment that was something that was maintainable here.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like you have every opportunity, especially when you like kind of select yourself and you commit to going to a place. If I mean, you yourself kind of fell into it a little bit more so when you were training there, but for any coach that's like looking for a new opportunity, you need to put yourself in it. And like program hopping and going from place to place just like to kind of change the scenery is a weird combination. I don't understand what you can't do that forever either. I don't know why people do
Yeah.
that versus kind of really try to make almost like the big time where you're at and really make that situation fit, even if it doesn't seem like it's the best thing at that time or the grass is always greener. Like you can still pull something out of it and you could still kind
Mhm.
of improve your situation. And if something better comes along the way, like that's fine. But if you're always kind of searching for something better, then you're never really focused on what you're working with at that time. And
Mhm.
you never give that place you're at like your full attention to actually see if it could evolve into something that you're kind of already searching for. And you don't know
Right.
the pitfalls of the other place until you get there either.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's not actually greener. It's just a way to escape where you are currently. But there's, you know, I didn't get into strength and conditioning professionally until I was 27. And so I'm 37 now. So I had a late start to it compared to a lot of people who maybe came up as volunteers, undergrad volunteers, and then moved into an internship and then maybe a part-time position and then started hopping around. And um, I just hopped right in with men's track and cross country when I was 27 after I'd been personal training for a while. But since I've been here, you know, if I had been globetrotting trying to find greener pastures, there's a lot of changes that took place while I was here. And so I think other people who may have spent 10 years hopping around would end up at the same place that I am now having having stayed here, which is, you know, we ended up getting our own performance center at our outdoor track, which is a track and cross country only, uh, weight room, training room, locker rooms, athlete lounge, equipment room. It's all kind of housed in this performance center that we didn't have before. We moved up from training in kind of a makeshift weight room, more of a dungeon feel that was down at our old or down at the indoor track. But there's been a lot of changes over 10 years that we were able to make happen here, as opposed to trying to jump ship and find places that already had the ball rolling at other places. But that is a crucial component of that is having um, coaches on board with those things and administrative support for them. And if you're in a place where you don't have either of those, then it can definitely finding greener pastures might be a better option. But if you have the support, even if you don't have the current situation, if people are willing to make it, then you can make it work.
Yeah, I think that's been the biggest reason that for my moves has been like just like the amount of support hasn't necessarily matched like the effort that I'm putting in, or maybe the goals don't match up with the direction I foresee the program or my position kind of moving in. So like sometimes those moves end up being necessary, but it's great to
Mhm.
see like not only like you guys having success when it comes to the podium and like at the end of the year and turning out individual athletes that kind of go on post collegiately professionally and go to the Olympics and stuff like that, but you guys are getting the backing from administration, the coaches there, and there's consistency. And I think, I mean, lots of teams can be successful once, but to kind of go back, reload, like reallocate things and then bring in new athletes, bring in different components to the team and still have success, even if it's not a culmination of like being the number one at the end of the year. Like that sustainability is a lot more difficult to kind of do year in and year out. And you have
Mhm.
to have some consistency where you're building on year 1 to 2 to 10 at this point in time for your career. So that's pretty cool because for myself, if I bounce around to another school, like you almost start at block zero again and then have
Yeah.
to kind of build up. I mean, you do that with your athletes when you get a new one every year, but to be able to see them like year four, or I'm sure some of your athletes are coming back after their college careers and trying to see if they can compete like at the national level as well.
Mhm.
So how are those relationships a little bit different when you start looking at, hey, now I have four, and then maybe I have a post career with these athletes? Like, how does that kind of develop and maybe change your mindset as a coach?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think one of the biggest things once they're out of college that changes is that they're not on that grueling NCAA schedule anymore. So they don't have every other weekend from January until June, and then maybe also in July and August if they're good enough to go to World Championships and Olympics, which, you know, I think most schools are lucky if they have one athlete who's good enough to do that. And just with the number of post collegiates that we have here, we just have we had lots of them, and so uh, I think getting off of the NCAA schedule changes the way you can program for them, both on the track and in the weight room. You can have longer blocks of training without having to back off for a qualifying opportunity if they're not going to pursue the World Indoor Meet. So uh, changes the nature of the indoor season quite a bit. Um, one thing that is a big challenge is on an individual level, it's not so bad, but when you have a lot of post collegiate athletes and we get to the spring and their schedules start going a million different directions, you might have some that are hopping onto the Diamond League circuit that are going to compete in a couple meets over in Europe in April and May, and then you have some that may travel opposite weekends to meets in the Caribbean or uh, there's different tiers of professional track meets that they start competing in, and the schedules just get way off. And so it's really hard to maintain our normal pattern of programming, which for me is usually 4 week blocks, just because it works well for the majority of the year, and for collegiates it works really well because we can plan it around basically having a double peak with conference and national meet. But it just gets tricky with the post collegiate. So uh, longer blocks of training without having to uh, compete as frequently during the indoor season, but a lot more flexibility, and really just trying to uh, find blocks of training where they're going to be here where we can get after it. And even if the programming is a little bit inconsistent, as long as we take advantage of those opportunities when they're not traveling and competing, um, I think having a more flexible mindset is really helpful, because if you have the same rigid approach to scheduling with the pros as you do with collegiates, then it stresses you out because when people are traveling, they're going to get off that schedule, and you have to find ways to continue to work and continue to adapt, knowing that you might get off schedule a little bit. Which every May is like that because we'll have the collegiate group that are kind of prepping our last preparations for the conference and the regional meet. And then the pros, there's Prefontaine Classic is a big one that's usually in May, but there's a couple other Diamond League meets in May, and a number of like gold and silver level meets that they're competing in. And if it's in the US, they might only be gone for 2 days. If it's in Europe, they might be gone for a week. And just it's really hard to keep tabs. So I just tell them when you're traveling, if you tell me what you have access to, as far as a weight room. If it's only hotel equipment, then we'll do the hotel special with some dumbbells and stuff, and we'll make it work. But just have to be flexible with them.
Yeah, that's great advice for anybody. Like I mean, it's a lot to think of too when you have so many athletes going in different directions and everything. But I mean, for anybody, even if your schedule's not that crazy with people competing post collegiately and then worrying about like the college NCAA schedule, indoors and outdoors, like having that flexibility within your programming and being able to kind of just brush it off and work with what you got. I mean, that can help any coach when
Mhm.
it comes to like track and field, because like I'll compete in Highland Games and you get it's kind of similar to a decathlon where you have 9 events, like I have to throw all in one
Mhm.
day. So you're kind of being a generalist in a lot of different sense of the word. Um, but like I'm training myself. And then like I don't have that team atmosphere necessarily until it kind of comes to competition day. When you're trying to like as a college, like working with like the Razorbacks team, is there still kind of like a team element, or because you have so many athletes going in different directions, like maybe you got some that are on the reserves, you got some that are like kind of rehab or redshirting, whatever it kind of ends up
Mhm.
being, like how do you kind of still keep keep that unity and like keep that cohesion together when they're doing so many different events, they're in different directions, they might be getting ready for a diamond league or Olympic trials and stuff like that. Like how do you still kind of keep the team together in a sense?
That's a good question too. On the collegiate side, it's a collaboration with the coaches and the environment and the expectation that the event coaches set. And so, uh, with that, there's occasional team meetings that we'll have, especially going into a big meet, and everybody's staying at the same hotel. We have our bus schedules. We'll have times where even if you're not competing, you're required to be at the meet to cheer on your teammates. And so, uh, with the weight room schedule, I do everything. The majority of the teams train in the morning, and it's kind of around their class schedule. But I get access to, maybe two big groups of athletes every morning on the collegiate side, maybe three. Kind of depends on what the schedule works out to be. And so I can kind of address some uh, team concerns or kind of be more of a factor in that team environment when I have those larger groups of athletes in the weight room. But I'm just trying to reinforce that vision and the environment that the sport coaches, the event coaches want to set. Uh, but I think with the nature of the collegiate season, it's easier to maintain that team atmosphere with just some of the logistics of traveling and competing with uh, bus schedule, everybody's on the flight together, hotel together, meet together. It's much different with the professionals because they often travel to meets alone, especially if it's during the collegiate season. They might not have their coach with them. They're traveling to these professional meets by themselves, like actually by themselves and competing by themselves. Uh, and honestly, at the professional level, there's no like even though at the Olympics you might be representing Team USA, um, it's really just it's even more of just a conglomerate of individual efforts. And I think this year they're actually doing some sort of a team award at the Olympics for the track portion of the Olympics, but it's just a very individual sport at the professional level and the Olympic level. Um, but I do think some of those team atmosphere ideas are still beneficial for professional athletes. If they get too much on their own island with that kind of that individual mindset, it's easy to create a prison and overthink things and when things are going poorly to get really negative about them. And when you have a team of other elite athletes around you, I still think those uh, whatever remnant of a team environment you can still immerse yourself in as a professional athlete will still benefit you, even though you're not really in a sport any longer that celebrates team victories the way that a collegiate track team or cross country team does. But I mean, I've been in that spot before myself. When I was out of college, I think ultimately it helped me as a coach a lot, having to figure things out by myself and train alone and it tests your motivation and your willingness to learn and experiment and adapt and re-implement ideas with your training. But I do think that after college, if I had had a group of motivated post-collegiate athletes that I was training with, it would have helped me immensely as an athlete. But I was just kind of out on an island and trying to figure out competition schedules, where I could go compete, if I could contact the meet director and plead to get accepted into it. And and I think that's something that gets lost. A lot of uh, good collegiate athletes, they look forward to getting outside of the team environment, not knowing what they're going to lose once they're outside of it. And so I've tried to impress upon some of them, it's kind of that the grass is not always greener on the other side idea as well. Just as long as you can immerse yourself in a team environment, you have that another factor, another thing that can raise your performance with just creating uh, expectations with being surrounded by people who are going to push you and uh, on the other side of that, if you're not competing particularly well, or if you have an injury, it can be a distraction to take you out of a negative mindset and throw you into quicksand that can quickly sink your season. So I still think it's important, even though it's not always present. So we have enough here where we can kind of create that, try to recreate or maintain as much of that team environment as we can. Each of our pro athletes here or our post collegiate athletes, I use that term interchangeably, but track is kind of weird. You can be a pro athlete going to pro meets and not actually have a contract. So uh, they each of the different coaches kind of maintains their own separate pro group on the track that they program for, but I have all of them in the weight room. And so we do set up training blocks by which coach is running that pro group. We kind of separate them out a little bit so that there's not mass chaos with an unmanageable amount of athletes who are the training is all very important because their livelihood rests on it. So we try to break it down into smaller groups while still maintaining some of that uh, team environment so they can be pushed by the other people around them.
No, that's a great point too. Like just talking about everything that has to do with like trying to still kind of instill some of that team atmosphere, whether it be in the collegiate side where you still have individual events and everybody's still pulling the same direction. But yeah, you don't have that kind of that lifeline when you go professional. And I know a
Mm-hmm.
lot of athletes are kind of looking forward to that. And that's another thing that like when you start talking about like NIL stuff and like being kind of self-promoting and kind of putting yourself in a spotlight outside of your team, like when you don't have that anymore and you want to still compete and you have to fight for resources, you have to get coaches on your own, you have to get talk
Mm-hmm.
to meet directors, do all those sort of things. You have to deal with potential injuries and rehab and still kind of stay motivated and train yourself. Like there's a lot of things that I think individual athletes post collegiately take advantage of when and just don't appreciate as much of what they had when they were in that team setting. And that's if you're trying to, like you said, like your livelihood is predicated on your ability to be successful, like whether it be on the track, on the field, whatever that is, and like you want to be a professional at it, you have to like really be able to balance that and still have success and prepare in a way that you when you didn't have those resources like from the team
Mm-hmm.
atmosphere you were at before.
Yeah, definitely. And it's weird because occasionally I'll have a conversation with somebody who's just not immersed in the world of track and field at all. And so they're familiar with the concept of a draft and a professional league and joining this other professional level. And so they're confused when they see like, why is this Olympic gold medalist running in this collegiate meet? And then you kind of have to explain like, well, there's been people who have been trying, but right now there's not really a professional there's the same concept doesn't exist in track as like an NBA and NFL and MLB, that kind of stuff. NHL, there's not a draft that you go to where you go join another team. You're just kind of like, okay, even if you're really good, you signed a contract to go pro. Um, but the logistics of that are you got to go back to your coach and ask them if they'll still train you as a pro. You got to go back to your strength coach or your athletic trainers and ask them if they're still willing to work with you. And if they are, it usually comes with a price tag now because their time that they spend with you is not part of their university expectations. And so I think a lot of that stuff just kind of gets lost in the process where uh, you either have to have really good relationships with people who will continue to help you. If you aren't in a spot where you can pay them, you're kind of at their mercy. uh, and if you are, then you need to go have those conversations and again, set up your team because it's not an easy realm to navigate when you're trying to do everything solo.
Right.
Yeah, something that I learned the hard way.
But that you said it right there too. Like you're setting up a different type of team now because once you are out of like kind of the collegiate system and you had all those resources and you had your teammates, now you have to kind of you're your own team and you have to set up kind of the resources as your like quote unquote
Hmm.
team of all right, well here's my strength coach. And like you kind of yeah, you do have to negotiate all that stuff again
Yeah.
because now you're a professional. But I've seen it before too, like seeing some of the professional track athletes like at UNF, like practice outside and you're end up doing the same event. You're going against people you're gonna end up racing and
Hmm.
or you're compete against. And like the maturity level to be able to like day in and day out train with someone that you're gonna end up going against is I think is lost on people as well too. And like myself, like competing in strength sports, and I'm sure you like with decathlon and like all your track and field experience too, like you realize more so than a lot of people that when it comes to like meet day, when it comes to competition day, like it's just you versus you. It's like you versus your best number. It's all
Hmm.
about trying to get your own PR. Like whether or not you end up winning is still based off of how well you do for yourself and your own personal record and like your training experience. So now like how do you are have you don't have to probably deal with this at your level, like working with the athletes that you have, but does that ever get lost on like track athletes, like or some of the maybe younger athletes you work with that like they're so fixated on the result that they're not really worried about like the performance that they've had or like the incremental improvements? I'm sure it comes in the weight room more so than it does
Hmm.
like presented like on like in the track and in the stadium. How do you kind of
Yeah.
relate that to them like in terms of like performance based stuff in the weight room?
Yeah. So it is tracks. I mean, obviously track is different than some other sports where our results are a lot more exposed. There's not much left to the imagination on someone's performance. Like there's a number in front of you and it is what it is. And there's not really debate on whether somebody had a good game or not. You can track all these metrics, but in track, there's just a number on the sheet and a coach might be able to extract more from that than the general public can. But I think a lot of them get hyper obsessed about uh, the number in front of them, and sometimes we have to kind of take them out of that mindset. Just go execute your plan and try to enjoy the process of racing other people. So, or competing against other people. But uh, in the weight room, obviously, there's uh, numbers attached to everything that we do, whether it be the weight on the bar or the velocity or the power output. There's a number attached to everything that I most of the time we're tracking those, but also when we're in season, there's that gray area where we have to be a little bit flexible. I'm not going to obsess too much about numbers when we're trying to compete in season because at that point, a lot of the work that's been done to get you where you need to be has already been done. We're using the weight room now as a tool to help manage our power output and manage our fatigue and make sure that we're pushing at the right time and backing off at the right time with proximity to our important competitions. So sometimes that same obsession with numbers on the track, it'll start creeping in the weight room. And I'm just trying to remind them, hey, this isn't whether you did 225 or 235. I'm really not that worried about it right now. I just want to use the tool for managing these other stressors as we lead into this championship. So hitting a heavier weight doesn't necessarily mean all the time that you're going to jump further or run faster as we're kind of in that championship phase of the season. We do get aggressive with it as we use it to lay our uh, foundation and raise our ceiling for strength and power output uh, earlier in the year. But when we're in season, I try to get people to stop hyper focusing on the number on the bar and more about the quality of the movement. Are we moving it the way we want to move it? And sometimes if it's an easier week, we're going to actually slow down your movement because I don't want it to be a nervous system stressor. But if it's the right week, then we're going to try to accelerate the weight quickly. It might be something where there's more of an elastic strength component where we're trying to absorb and reverse quickly. And so really what I focus more on is are we training the quality that I want to train the right way? And are we kind of in the ballpark as far as the intensity that's on the bar? But try to get people to step a little bit outside of just being hyper focused on what that is, because they're usually already hyper focused on those numbers in competitions.
Yeah, I'm talking to anybody that like competes in swimming, track and field, any throwing events like that. Like everybody talks about PRs. Everybody kind of knows the number. Even if you're competing against someone, you kind of know their personal
Hmm.
records too. Like it's such an obvious thing. I mean, it's right there on the scoreboard. It gets posted right after you hit the tape. As soon as you make that jump and you're in the sand, like you see it right there. You know if it's good or bad.
Hmm.
Um, and then like even the crowd like might not know the inner workings of everything, but they see the result and they kind of know the placings. That's why we use flags. That's why we use the sand and everything too. So like everybody in the crowd can relate to like what the results looks like too, and because they want to be excited about it as well.
Hmm.
Track and swimming are such an interesting thing because like there's such a more prevalent balance, or notable balance between what you do in the weight room and like your performance on the field. And like you
Hmm.
said it real well too, like just the managing the stressors and using the weight room as a tool. Because if you have an overexerted day in the weight room, it's going to show when you
Hmm.
actually go run the next day or you go throw the next day. It might not really exhibit itself or be as noticeable for like the naked eye or even like a coach, like when you're talking about being able to hide in a football game or a lacrosse or a soccer match, because there's so many other factors that go into play. But when your whole goal is to run as fast as possible, 100, 200, 400 meters, and then you have a high stress day on a day you're not supposed to, and you don't manage those things, it shows itself right away.
Yeah.
And that education piece that you're talking about with the athletes, like that's huge. Do you think more so like it's an even like to harp on relationships a little bit more too? Like, is it just almost natural and just so much easier for like the athletes to buy into you because of your own coaching experience, or just like your time at Arkansas, or like the coaches backing and rapport with you? Like, what do you think really just like solidifies an athlete buying in fully to the program and what you have to say?
I think it's a combination of all of those. I think it's important for coaches, particularly strength coaches, and even more particularly when they're a little bit younger, to set an example, right? I mean, the all the movements that I do in here, I demonstrate everything that I program for the athletes. I demonstrate for them, and I demonstrate how to do it correctly, and some less than ideal techniques as well. I demonstrate poor technique so that we can learn the difference between what a good rep and what a bad rep looks like, and maybe how to feel and really create that internal menu of corrections that they can make to improve when I might not be right there staring at them. But if they can learn to feel the difference, then we can make progress with it. But I think the fact that they see me train, I think helps them buy into it. In the fall, I do the first 2 cycles on the track with all the athletes just in the preseason. And I just tell them, if I'm going to ask you, a lot of you in the weight room, then it's okay for you to see me suffer out here with you too. And I think that gets them to buy in. And then I think I have uh, good support from our strength or from our sport coaches too, and they've made it known to the athletes that the weight room isn't something that we take lightly. It's a crucial piece of our training. Obviously, what they do on the track is more important. You're not going to get the results that you want just in the weight room, just from the weight room. But it's not an option. I think there's a lot of places where what you do in the weight room is just kind of this nebulous realm, and sometimes it's the quality you're trying to train is not very well defined. The movements that you use and how you use them is not very well defined. And we've had a lot of even people who transfer in from other Division I schools who are like, yeah, we just kind of went in and just I don't know, like some cleans and some squats maybe. And I don't know, we just kind of made it up. And that's kind of their experience in the weight room. And our coaches do not take that approach. And so I I think it only works. What I'm able to do with them only works when they have that expectation from the coaches that they came here to work with, that the weight room is an important part of what we do. You're in good hands with Coach Clark, and just listen to what he says. That makes my job easier. If I'm having to battle athletes who don't want to be there, and I have coaches who will allow them to not want to do it, um, or be inconsistent and skip and not apply effort. Then again, going back to finding the right situation, that's not a situation that I would want to be a part of. And I know there's other strength coaches who work with other track teams around the country, and that's the expectation. Is in the minds of the sport coaches, the weight room is just kind of a nebulous realm. And sometimes it's because the coach themselves never had much experience with it. They're not quite sure how to integrate what you do in the weight room with what they want to do on the track. And a lot of times they're petrified of either the athletes getting too big or doing something in the weight room that causes a hamstring injury. Those are the two big ones. And so then it's just kind of left up to the athletes. Like, yeah, was do it if you want. And then it's impossible to program for. And it creates a really big problem where if you're trying to avoid soreness, especially when you're in season and athletes are allowed to show up when they want, well, they skip for a couple of weeks and they come in the week of a meet and they do anything, they're going to be sore. There's nothing you can do about it. and and then you're in this constant battle with your coaches about why you made them sore the week of a meet and got them hurt. And it's like, well, you just created this expectation where the weight room's not important and you let them go in there whenever you want. And so that's maybe a long-winded answer to your to your question, but I think getting them to buy in starts with the expectations from their sport coaches. And once you have that expectation, it's easier for me or a strength coach um, to get them to buy into what we do. And then, I think there's this caricature of strength coaches where they're just kind of autocratic pricks uh, with the athletes that they work with. And you have to, especially, I mean, in track, I have 100 athletes on roster and then a bunch of pros. You have to figure out how you maintain uh, some semblance of authority in there, because it can't be a free for all that's just constant chaos all day. Um, but you can do that without being a jerk to the athletes, and I think that starts with just being personable and trying to just, when they come in, hey, how's your day? How's your body feel today? Um how are your classes? Just trying to be a normal person, having a regular conversation with them. It kind of takes down their guard a little bit, and now you can have an actual conversation with them and maybe explain the goals of what you're doing and why you want them to do it. And then when they understand it, I think that's another issue, is you're asking them to do something if they don't know why it's important. If they don't draw that connection from what they're doing in the weight room to how it's going to benefit them on the track, uh, they're not going to apply the same effort.
Yeah, that's completely true. Like they need to be able to feel and like understand and see that connection too. And yeah, some athletes are going to respond a lot differently. They come from different backgrounds, or they might come from different programs where it wasn't valued as much, or it was overvalued in some ways, or bad technique was taught, or bad habits were kind of created. And to have the support like from the coaching staff down, like that's huge, because then you don't have to fight that battle. Like you can start developing the relationship and you can kind of do the program as you see fit, because a coach is going to come in and be unwavering. Like we have high expectations for this, and we have full support for like what Coach Clark is doing in the weight room. So if there's an issue, like it's not coming from there, and there's nothing that we're going to do to say against it. It puts the athlete in a hard position too, when like, even if a coach is just kind of neutral to it, and it's like, and I think that's almost even worse, because then you put the athlete in like the professional opinion. Make the athlete make the
Yeah.
tough decision of,
Yeah.
Well, they don't really care, but and then they like overthink it because
Hmm.
now it's not the coach doesn't really care, but they dictate my playing time. Like the strength coach says it's important, and they might be kind of neutral too because they understand that the sport coach ultimately is the decider. Like we talked about culture and everything too, and like having the vision, and we kind of reiterate those things and reinforce it. We're not the ones that like actually, and we cultivate it, but we're not the ones that create it. Like it's
Right.
got to come from the sport coach.
Hmm.
Otherwise, we're in that same no man's land too, where an athlete isn't going to, there's no, you're going to get one in like a 100,000 athletes that's going to pick the strength coach over the sport coach.
Yeah.
And I guarantee they're not playing.
Yeah.
So I I don't
Yeah.
I don't
Future
want to make them
powerlifting.
choose. Yeah, I don't want to make them choose when it comes down to it. But it, I think I'm assuming too, like when you get to the point of like a fully funded like track team like such as yours, and you have so many different event coaches too. Not only is the head coach like on board, but every single event coach is like, this is important. And like you going
Mhm.
into the weight room is an expectation. Like you can't go like complain to mom and then like give dad a different story. Like it's not
Right.
going to happen if
Yeah.
the expectation there is, hey, you're in the weight room, you're doing what Coach Clark says, he understands everything that's going on, and we're fully on board with the
Hmm.
entire thing that's happening.
Yeah. And you made a really good point, which I agree with. I think being unopinionated on it is actually a worse situation than them just saying, all right, we're not going to the weight room for the next 2 weeks. We're just done. Like at the end of the season, it's like, okay, well, I disagree with that philosophy because I think there's still a lot to be gained from using the weight room to help us navigate the end of the season and help us peak and help manage our stressors. But if you're not going to send them in, then at least we're avoiding the perception that I created a problem in here, and they can just focus on what they're doing on the track, and the athlete just can entirely focus their attention on that. But yeah, it's being lukewarm is kind of the the worst of the three.
Yeah, I've had some of those teams that have kind of seemed like that in the past, and like the coaches kind of waffles back and forth with it. And then like they want something, but then a month later they see something shiny and they want something new.
Mm.
So they're coming in and they're like, hey, we want to do like these priming circuits like right before we like go play. Like we haven't lifted and we lifted once a week for the last like 2 months. And you think that lifting like 12 hours before you guys play a game is going to be the
Yeah.
thing. And then you're already telling the girls you don't want them to be sore, or you're telling the players they don't want to be sore. And I know exactly what's going to happen. Like you're setting up for failure. But I have these conversations with coaches. Like this is like kind of where the art comes into like strength and conditioning, where a coach wants something, but like the result you see is not going to get that. And that's all they want. That's all they want. They keep pushing for it. And it seems like a cop out to pull back as a strength coach, like, hey, or you talk to admin, you're like, it seems like they're like, hey, you seems like you want to do less work. I'm like, no, my job is to get them as prepared as possible. Like I get to choose the means of which to do it. But if the
Hmm.
coach isn't going to give me kind of full autonomy or give me the time and day to train them, and the results on the field and their performance is important. If they haven't come in for a month,
Yeah.
my professional opinion is to turn them away the day
Right.
before a game.
Yep.
Like that's not me trying to get out of work. That's me trying to set them up for success.
Right.
And it's it,
You're spot on. That happened with a couple of athletes that we have here. A couple of years ago, they had just, we set this standard, but for whatever reason, there's a couple that didn't come for a couple weeks, and it was leading into a national championship, and they came back in to lift right before, like 4 days before the national championship. I'm like, yeah, now, I appreciate you coming back. I actually appreciate you coming back and being willing to come and do work 4 days before the meet. But at this point, there's more to be lost than there is to be gained. And so I'm going to have you not lift today. And then they performed great at the national championship, but it's just, I think it's not somebody that I work with now, but that I have had in the past DMs on Instagram from a coach that I worked with, just the shiny new things that they found in their feed that they wanted to implement. And it's like, it's kind of, you're just cherry picking different ideas here. And I think that's something that gets lost, when you're the one behind the scenes making the long-term programming and thinking about the whole annual training cycle. What you do at one point in the year is entirely dependent on everything that you did leading up to that point. And so if you're just trying to take these ideas that you found on social media or found in an article and implement them in without considering the body of work that needed to be done leading into it, then you are creating a recipe for some of those in-season problems like unnecessary soreness, just chronic nervous system fatigue, doing something right before a game. Like there's definitely ways that you can use the weight room to prime you for a game. But if you haven't been lifting, now you're creating an unfamiliar stressor with an athlete right before a big performance. And that's not how you do it. And so the full context of how you're implementing those things has to be taken into consideration. And that's the body of work that you did leading up to it. And so that's, I mean, everything that we do here at the end of the year, uh, it's all, the whole year is reverse engineered. What are the things that I want to do towards the end of the year when we're peaking? All right, now let's create some timelines here on how I developed that skill set from the beginning of the year when athletes show up on campus at the end of August. And so it's all this progression of related movements through the entire year. And if you're just going to kind of cut that off and implement these other movements in season, you didn't do the body of work that you needed to do to lead into that. So it might work, but it also might be a total disaster. and and you just have to kind of start with the end in mind, I think, and reverse engineer your season so that when it comes time to using the weight room to improve your performance at the end of the year, when performance is most important, you've done the work where the risk is mitigated. There's always some level of risk in there. An accident can happen, but we at least have developed the requisite skill set to minimize that risk unless somebody's just intentionally being sloppy or doing something stupid. But just doing a 180 and totally changing up the stimulus because you saw it on social media, you got to figure out what body of work led to them being able to use that tool successfully in season. Is it different than what you did? Then you might not want to use it if it's not
Yeah.
actually solving any problems.
That's great. That's a great way to put it. Like, I mean, reverse engineering and kind of going backwards from what your ultimate goal is or what part of the season is going to be kind of your peak point of time. And
Mhm.
track is perfect for that too, because you know when those high points are, even though there's going to be multiple times during the season versus like a traditional like team sport where you're going to get those small spikes and you kind of know when the playoffs come. Like it's you're progressively getting better and like getting to the point of championships, conference championships, like NCAAs and things like that, that you
Mhm.
can kind of work your way towards. And your body of work that leads up to it is the most important part about like what you choose at that moment. So
Mhm.
that's a great point. Like you had like a lot of track background coming into it. Obviously, like when you first started at Arkansas, like you had some personal training experience and everything too, but you might not have been like predisposed to some of like maybe the weird biases or like certain coaching like trends and stuff that happen like in the collegiate setting because you didn't do like the internships or the graduate
Mhm.
assistant stuff where you kind of like had a mentor going up. You had probably mentors in different ways, but you were full time right from the beginning. So for coaches maybe that don't have experience like in track and field and there's such a wide difference in the type of events and kind of preparing them for it, and rather than just give a blanket program to everybody on the track team or just say, hey, you're skinny, so you do this program. Like you're one of the bigger guys, you do this program,
Yeah.
whatever it kind of be. How do you what's the like some advice you'd have for some coaches that are coming up to like maybe get them up to speed on like the intricacies and like kind of make their programming a little more specific or just kind of learn more about the unique side of like the different individual events like that are involved in like track and field.
Sure. Yeah. I think I obviously I came through as an athlete and I was familiar with what we were doing in season, but not necessarily dissecting what we were doing in season. So yeah, actually like trying to manage the lifting for other people around a peak cycle for a conference and national championship was a new experience. But I'd say for the uh, probably the most important thing for a new coach would be to develop a relationship with the event coach. We've talked a lot about developing the relationship with the athletes. You want them to buy into what you're doing, but you also don't want to have this chronic stress, chronic tension between you and the sport coach, because then ultimately you're going to be limited with what you're able to do in the weight room with the athletes who may or may not buy into you. So I'd spend time uh, developing a relationship with the sport coach, and then don't wait. We can usually foresee a problem when it's about to happen, and we're just kind of, if something's going to happen, you're just kind of waiting for that conversation with a coach to unfold, mentally preparing yourself for it. But you can get ahead of it, right? So if you want to use a certain style of training or implement certain movements or progressions in the weight room, rather than just doing it and then waiting for the coach to come ask you why, or to accuse you of doing something that hurt an athlete, uh, go have the conversation with the coach ahead of time and just explain what you're doing, why you want to do it, and how it will benefit the athlete and their performance that's under that coach. Because we hope that you have the buy-in from the coaches on what you're doing in the weight room, but that's not always the case, especially if you're hired as a strength coach from your strength and conditioning department and assigned to a sport. If the coaches didn't really have any say in you being there, and I know that happens a lot, uh, then it's really important that you try to get ahead of it with a conversation with the sport coach. And then I think them trusting you, or at least knowing that there's an open door to have a dialogue with regards to how you manage your training, will go a long ways. Because there's a lot of ways to use the weight room to improve performance. And if I just took a video of everything that we do in here and compared it to a video of, or the programming for another national caliber team, there's probably going to be some overlap in concepts, but there's also going to be things that people did differently, but both teams are having success. So there's different ways to do it. But just have a reason for what you're doing, a quality that you want to train, and then develop the relationship with the coach so you don't have that huge barrier when you're starting to implement it. And then at least if there is an issue later, now you're not facing the problem of having done something that the coach was totally unaware of. Um, so that's luckily when I started, I started off just with the men's team, and then after a few years, men, we'd had success, so the women asked me to join their side as well, and that's when I took over both the men and the women. But with the men, the coaches were my collegiate coaches, so that relationship was already established, at least from an athlete to coach perspective. But the door to have the dialogue was already open, which was very helpful for me to, when I started. I used to send these long emails about why I wanted to do these certain movements, what quality we were training, and kind of get into maybe the science of it. And then after a while, it was just they trusted me to run it. So now if I really only approach them with an idea if I'm going to change something from what we've been doing. And I'll only change something if it solves an observable problem. And then, the dialogue is open and we can go have that conversation, and they might not want to change it, and that's fine, but at least the door is open.
Yeah, that last point too is good too. Like you don't need to just change for the sake of change either. Like if you see
Mhm.
something or you foresee like a problem coming, like that's a great time to like be able to have that conversation. But you don't want that first conversation with a new coach or a new staff to be something bad that's happened. You
Yeah.
kind of you want to have a good foundation kind of built ahead of time where you guys are on the same page, because inevitably there's going to be something interesting that pops up. It might not be a successful season, or maybe an injury occurs, or I mean any multitude of things that could happen. Like if you already have a developed relationship with that sport coach, then one, you're on the same page when it comes to training and like the athletes that you're working with. But when those harder conversations come up, like you know each other a little bit better, that the first conversation isn't just a blowout.
Yeah.
And that's good
No,
that you kind of didn't have to worry about that as much when you
yeah,
first started.
I think with every coach, there's always they have an investment in the athletes. They brought them here to win championships, and they need to protect that that so even the ones that you have good relationships with, that's still going to be their perspective is protecting the athlete's ability to perform. And so even me, like I've got a 20-year relationship with the men's coaches and a decade-long relationship with the women's coaches. But it's still something where if I foresee something, I try to go get ahead of it, so that we're all on the same page. And especially like if we're moving from one cycle to the next, and I foresee maybe an increased risk of soreness with what I have planned, I'll go tell the coaches ahead of time, like, hey, is that all right if they're a little bit sore next week? I had planned on pushing quite a bit, and we're still kind of in the beginning part of our preseason where they're not really used to the lifting yet. And most of the time it's fine. Occasionally we'll run into a scenario, maybe a couple cycles in, where they're wanting to do some testing on the track, and it's actually not a great week for them to be sore. And so then we talk about how we're going to switch things up. But so much of it just comes down to soreness, right? And athletes' ability to perform or do the workouts in the presence of soreness. And so if it's something like that or another debilitating quality that could impact that, just try to see the hot spots where it might happen and go have the conversation and just be willing to adapt.
Yeah, that adaptability, but then being able to communicate with the coaching staff and manage the fatigue and soreness too. Like
Mhm.
there's going to be different times this season where it's kind of you got to buckle down and do it, but um, being able to prioritize testing and then find times when like this competition is going to be more meaningful and maybe this athlete doesn't need to do this at this point in time. Like it all comes down to like the relationship that you forge with the athletes and the coaching
Mhm.
staff, and being able to relay the importance of what you're doing, but also know what points in time that you dial back and the track becomes the most important thing. So that's great. Hey, we talked about a little bit too, like you getting out in the fall for a couple cycles to kind of run with everybody and kind of compete too. What like from your post collegiate days and your collegiate days running, like how's your training kind of different now? Are you still gearing up for some races and decathlons right now, or are you
Yeah,
kind of
so
throttling down a little bit?
I kind of take it all a day at a time. I always have some sort of a goal, but I'm a lot more flexible and adaptable. I've gotten good at pivoting, especially the last, the couple of years I was out of college and still doing decathlons. I learned a lot from that because I got into what I think would be around 8,100 point shape for a decathlon, which is kind of like at the time was like the maybe the bottom level of what you would consider an elite decathlete. It was not a 85, 86 where you're a medal contender, but I thought I was in 8,100 point shape. And with the decathlon, it's unique because you might only get two chances to do a decathlon in a year, especially post collegiate. You're not on the collegiate schedule. They might not let post collegiates into the meet. So if you show up and do one in the spring, and especially if it's in the north and it's 45 and rainy, then you only have one other chance, right? And I wasn't someone who could go score 9,000 points and score 86 in the rain and still have it, be important. It's like if I show up and it's rainy and I don't do well, then I'm not going to the NC or the US championships, or I'm not going to qualify for what I need to. And so it was just kind of the cycle of get into really good shape, but then, have one crummy weather meet and then one meet where, yeah, you no height in the vault or you get an injury right before. And so I had to learn how to pivot my goals really quickly. And that's what kind of pushed me down when I'd be really frustrated with having felt like I wasted a lot of time preparing for something that I didn't ever get to see the result for. It forced me to put the energy that I had or take out my frustration on something else. And so I got into training for physique and powerlifting, and then triathlons after COVID hit and all the gyms were shut down. I could go run and bike and stuff. Uh, but it helped me just to learn how to pivot. And so right now, I've done a couple of masters track competitions. Um, I'm planning on competing at the World Masters Championships in Sweden right after the Olympics are done. So that's kind of my short-term goal right now. I've had other challenge. I make these challenges for myself just because they give me a goal to train for, and if as long as I have a goal, I'll hit it hard and I can springboard from one goal to the next. But I yeah, I kind of did those challenges. Or I do those challenges during the year, and then in the summer, I've kind of focused in on an actual competition. So for this summer, I'm running an Open 800 at a meet in Iowa in July, and then the World Masters Championships in August. It's my plan right now. And then in November, I'm planning on making my High Rocks debut. I don't know if you've ever heard of High Rocks, but different fitness competition. So those are I'm all over the place, but there's I train frequently what overlaps between them, and then just spend enough time kind of dialing in on the specific components of the competition as it gets closer.
I mean, that's kind of true decathlete like fashion. Just trying to find as much as an overlap as possible and then kind of making it as seamless as possible to go from one
Mhm.
event to another. I mean, it's impressive to kind of talk to people that have gone through that. Like triathlons themselves are already three events. Like even though they're endurance events for the most part, there's still different
Mhm.
aspects to all of it, and there's different character traits and components that need to be kind of managed and then perfected and worked on. But to throw 10 events or to go bounce back and forth on one from another, like that's impressive. So I mean, kudos to you. It's always good to have a challenge and have something to push forward versus just kind of going into like with the goal of working out and sweating. So
Yeah. Yeah,
definitely can't really do
that
that as a
doesn't do it
strength
for me.
coach.
I gotta have it oriented towards something and then I'm good. But if I'm out in no man's land, it just feels pointless.
Hey, well, you got a lot to work for. You got a lot to look forward to, a lot of good training, but no, there's definitely some cool things moving forward for you. But hey, I know we got to get you out of here pretty soon. Like got some athletes coming in. So, hey, this is probably going to be cake for you then because like most good training sessions, like we end the show with a finisher. So, I got 4 quarters, 4 questions and definitely overtime, which should be a breeze for a decathlete and someone that's already got all these things planned out. So we'll
All
go through
right,
the questions. Feel free. You can go rapid fire. You can take your time on any, but you ready?
let's do it.
All right. First one I got for you. Biggest influence in the strength and conditioning profession and favorite athlete growing up.
Ooh, okay, so that's two. Biggest influence in the strength and conditioning profession. Uh, a lot of what steered me when I started was articles and books written by Christian Thibodeau. Yeah.
All right.
So
All right.
he helped me kind of he helped me kind of navigate some of my programming decisions when I started. Uh, and then favorite athlete growing up. Uh, yeah, Michael Johnson.
Okay.
Yeah.
That one was interesting to me too because I wondered if it was actually going to be a track athlete or not.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I mean, I grew up, I was born in the 80s, but I grew up in the 90s, and obviously that's Michael Jordan territory. Uh, but I grew up watching him, but then once I got into track, it was in the prime of Michael Johnson's career. So I was kind of just getting into track when he did his 200, 400 double at the 96 Olympics. And then uh, I think for my 12th birthday, my parents got me an autographed framed picture of him, and that was just like my prized possession growing up was this framed Michael Johnson autograph of him crossing the line with his hands up when he ran 19.3. So yeah, Michael Johnson.
That's awesome. Hey, so when you're not coaching, you're not competing. what are some of your hobbies that are outside kind of training?
I I guess I've spent a lot of time writing articles recently, but that's also about training. So I'll branch totally outside that. I I played in a band in college, so I play guitar and piano. I haven't played as much lately because I have three kids. That when I go home, I focus on them. But one thing that we really like to do is go on uh, bug, reptile, and amphibian hunts. So we go explore rivers and stuff, trying to catch bugs and and uh, frogs and lizards and stuff. So I've always kind of been. I got a degree in biology, so I've always been interested in. That's kind of like a herpetologist at heart. So I like taking my kids out and just exploring that kind of stuff.
All right. Hey, so if you weren't coaching, what do you think you would be doing as a profession? And if I had to take track away, what do you think would be a sport you would choose to go pro in if you had the chance?
Um, what was the first question again?
Like if you weren't coaching, what do you think you would be doing as a
Oh,
profession?
I I think my answer to that would have changed like every year or two, like my whole adult life.
Well, what is it right? What
Honestly,
is it right
right now,
now?
so I'll go back to writing. I think I would be a writer,
Okay.
honestly. I I enjoy the process of writing, and my articles uh they're really long-winded, but I like just deep diving into a topic and then uh, learning about it as I'm writing about it, and just kind of finding my voice. I have a really inefficient way of doing it where it's like a couple weeks of word vomit and none of it's organized, and then I got to go back and edit and place things. But having an end product that is actually meaningful and valuable for people, I really enjoy that process. So if I wasn't coaching, I'd probably be a full-time. I'd try to be a full-time writer. I don't know if I'd write just about performance. I really enjoyed the process of writing, but what was the second question? I had an answer to that one, but for
If I had to take track away, what do you think you would try
oh,
to go professional at if you given another opportunity?
uh, the allure of playing the sport at the highest level is is tempting. It'd probably be baseball, but I know how many people kind of get stuck in the minor leagues, and I've known some strength coaches that have been minor league strength coaches, and I don't want that at all. But if I was guaranteed to go pro in a sport and I could play it at the highest level, I'd probably choose baseball because uh, it doesn't beat you up as much as I love hockey. I played hockey growing up too, but it doesn't beat you up as much as hockey and football do. I I don't have the stature for basketball. And I think I'd actually make I was a decent baseball player when I was younger, and I think if I could do it all over, couldn't do track, I would have probably pursued baseball.
All right. Hey, so if you're setting up an ideal training day for yourself, what music are you listening to and what's that post-training meal look like for you?
Post-training meal and music. So I kind of branched out recently. A lot of what I listen to is EDM, electronic dance music or electric dance music. So it's just like a constant beat with some like synthesized sounds in the background. When I'm in here training groups, it's usually hip hop, R&B, rap. Uh, Other groups might put on some pretty hardcore rock, and so when I'm training myself, I don't listen to any of the stuff that I have going in here all day long. So lately, it's been EDM. EDM. The post meet meal is going to be uh, probably. Oh man, there's so many things. Steak and lobster with ice cream.
That is a combo.
Yeah. It's probably gonna make me throw up afterwards, but uh yeah, steak and lobster with ice cream as a dessert.
Well, you earned it. Hey, so last one I got for you. Like if you can try to sum up what strength and conditioning means to you in just either one word or one kind of phrase or sentence.
Um, boy, that one I don't have an answer to. This Okay, I do have an answer, but I'll preface it with it's kind of a zoomed out look at strength and conditioning and not necessarily a zoomed in one. And I'd say life changing. Um, I say that because for for me and my career as an athlete, I didn't get good at the decathlon until I got strong in the weight room. And then ultimately my experience having done that is what set the foundation to be where I am now. So um, on a personal level, it was life changing. And then just watching some of these athletes come through here, having the opportunity to work with them and watching them go from, ambitious freshmen to competing for Olympic medals, their life changes. And obviously the weight room wasn't all of that or even the most important part, but it does play a role that I think without they might not be at the same level. So I'd say life changing.
No, I'd agree. That's pretty awesome. And like your opportunity to kind of see that unfold too. Like not only did you get to live it yourself in a lot of sense of the word, but to be able to see it with the athletes, like it's even, I'd argue it's more fulfilling when you get to
Mhm.
see the athletes do that. And you see them go from not just 1 to 4 years, but have like an Olympic like cycle is 4 years to see them
Mhm.
go to the next stage and then get to watch them on TV or help them get prepared for that and like kind of see the joy of being able to represent their country and compete at the highest level in the world. That is definitely life changing. That's awesome. So, hey, Coach, I really appreciate you coming on today. Like, I know you're a busy man at this time. You just came off of another championship season, and you're getting geared up for the Olympic trials and everything with a lot of your professional athletes as well. So, I appreciate you coming on. For anybody that's got questions, want to read some of your articles and everything like that, where can they kind of get a hold of you and find that information?
Sure. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks for the invite, and sorry it took so long to set this up, but I appreciate you bringing me on. Uh, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is just at Track Strength, and then on Twitter I'm at Matt Clarkensaw, one word. I do more with my track content, and I post my articles on Instagram. But I also have articles that I post periodically. Right now, with how busy the track season's been, I haven't done it for a while. But Art of Training, it's my Substack account that me and a physical therapist that I work with post articles on there pretty frequently. And then again, that's on Substack, so it's an app and a website. But I've also had a couple of articles published on the website Simply Faster. So if you want to read just those published articles, they're available on Simply Faster.
Awesome. Well, hey, we'll make sure that we link everything in there and hopefully you get a little downtime after the Olympics but I mean at that point in time we're gearing back up for
Yes,
the
right into fall
fall
training.
season. Hey, well, I thank you again for coming on. It's been awesome to talk to you, Coach, and definitely we'll share everything when everything goes live and have all the links to it. But I appreciate your time today. It was great to get you on and talk.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.